Thanks you all for being here and for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here, and especially I'm excited to be focused in the way that we are for these 3 weeks. I just want to say a little bit about where I'm coming from, and I'll say more as we go along. And I have us in a circle because I'm hoping this is going to be more like a seminar format where we can also share a bit more and just be prompted by some things. So at Elmhurst, I've been teaching now for my 26th year. I can't believe it's been that long. But besides biblical studies, for about 15 years, I have also been co-teaching a class in Native American Studies. Oh, okay. All right. Is this better? Oh, I'm sorry. I realize that that's helpful to people. Okay. So, yeah, and my colleague in political science, Professor Walker, has Native American background. So I had always had an interest in Native American traditions, culture, spirituality. And so together we decided to create a course. But it's very interesting because it's an interdisciplinary course because she teaches constitutional law and First Amendment religious liberty topics. And so in this course, we look at the history of Native American nations, cultures, but also the interaction with their desire to traditionally practice Native spiritualities in sacred land. And so there have been a whole series of court cases in this country, earlier treaties, of course, but court cases in which different Native American nations have tried to get the right to practice their spirituality, and they almost always lose when it goes to the Supreme Court level. Right? So anyway, we've been teaching this course for about 15 years, and so I have delved a lot into trying to learn about the diversity of Native American cultures. You know, there's not just one Native American religion or anything like that. But some of what I'll be sharing is to bring some aspects of a worldview, a shared kind of worldview from indigenous cultures without oversimplifying. But then also comparing that to the Bible in the sense of the ancient peoples. In a sense, we should say we're indigenous peoples, right? We tend to read the Bible through our modern Western lens, and we don't always necessarily pick up on some of those indigenous ways of living, etc. Okay, so I have put up here this opening for us, and I'm going to read a prayer for us to open from what's called the Green Bible. Has anybody seen this? The Green Bible. This is really cool. Okay, so this is like maybe 15 years old also. This is actually the NRSV Bible with all the texts in it that relate to the earth or the land in green letters. You know, you remember the red letter Bible?
Yeah.
Like Jesus' words? Okay, this is the Green Bible, and it's not Jesus' words, but it's practically every page has something green on it, related to the earth or the land, right? Or the universe, the sky, whatever. And needless to say, all of Genesis 1 is in green. So I'm going to pass this around later so you can look at it. But it's got quite a few really good essays at the opening, and we may read a couple of those. I may share those, Dale, if you can distribute, or your committee, if anybody wants to read some really brief little essays from this. Okay? So I'm going to, let's pray. I'm going to read for you the Canticle of the Creatures. Have you ever heard of this from St. Francis of Assisi? Okay, maybe. Okay, but it's a prayer. So let's just bow our heads and just, if you'll listen, especially for those aspects of creation. Most high, all-powerful, good Lord, yours are the praises, the glory, and the honor, and all blessing. To you alone, most high, do they belong, and no human is worthy to mention your name. Praise be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially Sir Brother Sun,
who is the day, and through whom you give us light. And he is beautiful and radiant with great splendor, and bears a likeness of you, Most High One. Praise be you, my Lord, through sister moon and the stars. In heaven you formed them clear and precious and beautiful. Praise be you, my Lord, through brother wind, and through the air, cloudy and serene, and every kind of weather, through whom you give sustenance to your creatures. Praise be you, my Lord, through sister water, who is very useful and humble and precious and chaste. Praise be you, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you light the night, and he is beautiful and playful and robust and strong. Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs. Praise be you, my Lord, through those who give pardon for your love, and bear infirmity and tribulation. Blessed are those who endure in peace, for by you, Most High, shall they be crowned. Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister, bodily death, from whom no one living can escape. Woe to those who die in mortal sin. Blessed are those whom death will find in your most holy will, for the second death shall do them no harm. Praise and bless my Lord, and give him thanks, and serve him with great humility. Amen. Amen. This is St. Francis's approach to the created order, which is a little different than what we sometimes hear in a prayer about, the creation. If I were to just open this up a little bit to discuss what did you hear in this that is different somewhat to what we normally might hear with regard to the earth creation? How is it different? And I'm not looking for some right answer here. It's just a
It
kind
didn't seem very anthropomorphic to me at all.
Okay. It didn't seem anthropomorphic. Not human-centered.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say almost opposite of that, but I appreciated that it personified, not necessarily human-centered, but personified like fire as a brother and, Mother Earth as your sister and such. But yes, not in a, not in that sense.
Yeah. Personifying nature, right? Like the human. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I agree with what Jamie just said, because what I liked about it was, I felt like it helped me to look at nature as members of my family or friends.
Yes.
Catherine,
Catherine just shared that it helped her look at creation as part of our human family,
yeah,
the relations,
yes.
relationship. And this is actually something that we would see in indigenous cultures, especially Native American cultures. You may have heard the phrase, all of our relations. I think this comes from the Dakota tradition, where when people speak of the animals and plants, they're not speaking of just their relatives, they're speaking of all of our relations include those in nature who they see as living beings. And we'll get into this more, with consciousness, right? So it's actually, even though it sounds like personification, and I think even St. Francis, and I often when I would teach, for years and years I would teach in the Bible where it referred to nature's aspects, the mountains, the trees, that would sound like they were personified like humans, right? The prophet might call for the mountains to bear witness by agreeing a judgment oracle against the people. Come, mountains, and hear what the Lord has to say, right? And I always, for most of my career, thought of that as a personification. But having now studied indigenous and Native American traditions, I think that in the Bible, they may have felt like the mountains had consciousness. Think about that. It'll blow your mind, won't it? I mean, think about it like that. And that's what I kind of, as we go through 3 weeks, I'm hoping that we can kind of shift our worldview, at least temporarily, to consider an alternative way of seeing creation. And even science is kind of moving in this direction a little bit. Okay, that's a big statement, but.
I was
Were you
going to
comment?
say
Yeah.
that never in my lifetime did I think that people would talk about the consciousness of trees. And right now, scientists with their studies on trees, they're using this consciousness. And because I remember way back when Jane Goodall, with her studies on chimpanzees, they did not see chimpanzees as being social beings. Didn't have a culture. Didn't have consciousness in the way, well, it just goes, science is really changing, at least the terminology.
And they want me to repeat, so Carol's saying that she was never thought that she would hear that trees have consciousness and that scientists are starting to speak of trees like this. I'm going to show a little clip later, which you may have seen from PBS, where they show trees like slow motion and what they're doing really that we can't see that reflects consciousness in the view of slow scientists. Yeah. Thank you. So just moving along a bit, there is a trend right now in biblical studies to really take a look at the Bible more from a perspective of nature and the earth and in light of our current situation. And I understand that there's some disagreement about global warming and climate change and all that. I'm not really here to debate that, but assume that we are in a crisis. And but really, this is more about what I would like for us to do is more about how we relate to nature, right? From a spiritual perspective, how we can, how we might. Here's just one example. Oxford has a whole bunch of new handbooks out on different topics, and this one happens to be on the Bible and ecology. You know, the word ecology goes way back, right? So maybe the 60s even. Those of us, I'm a baby boomers, we remember ecology was the big word for a long time. Right? Now it's environmental studies or, different things. Here's another, This Sacred Earth, Religion, Nature, the Environment, and this is a collection of articles. These articles are written by people from different religious backgrounds, all addressing, the earth and nature. Now, before we get into anything more, and I'm saying today is kind of introductory, okay? But I think it's really important, if I want all of us to kind of rethink or at least ponder our relationship to nature from a spiritual perspective, that we talk about what is our experience of nature. What has it been in our lives, right? So this first question I put up here, what are your most memorable experiences in nature? Or maybe pick one. And we've lived long lives, so how can we do that, right? But when I say nature, I don't necessarily only mean like my garden, okay? Which that can be fine, okay? But I want you to also think in terms of wild nature, okay? Yes, ma'am.
As a child, I remember we lived sort of at a prairie kind of location, watching storms come across the horizon with the clouds and the lightning and the thunder. That was an incredible experience. And my dad used to go out there and say he was calling the storm. He was calling. Now watch, I'm calling the thunder. I know. Well, I didn't know he connected. I didn't, but I thought he was calling the storm.
What's your name, sorry?
Susan.
Susan just shared that her experience growing up as a child was in the plains and the prairies and the storms would come across and she would experience those. Okay. Other memorable experience you have in nature in your life? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Nancy. Well, I'm Nancy, and I traveled to Antarctica at one point in my life. And it was amazing. And the nature there was absolutely amazing. And it was, you expected to be cold, of course. But it was just not only cold, but it was so beautiful. And it was so wonderful to see it in that sense of, because nobody changed it, nobody did anything to it, we just went there and it was what it was,
Wow.
which was great.
So Nancy just shared about being in Antarctica and how beautiful it was, and because it was unchanged, pristine, I guess, right? Can you say a little bit more about the difference of how you feel when you see something that's pristine like that versus nature that has been kind of impinged upon? What's the difference in feeling? That's a hard question.
I think there's a real difference. I mean, I was on the Continental Divide for a summer when I was an undergraduate. We were doing Arctic and alpine research, and so you're right up there with the grizzly bears. No protection to speak of, other than that maybe they fear us. Versus, being out at the Arboretum, which I spend a lot of time. But I love the Arboretum, even though it's, they do burns, which of course the Indians did, but it's more artificial in a sense. They're changing it. So I think that for me, anything in nature is beautiful, especially when I look at it and watch it and sit there and just, a single bird and what happens. So you can be in a wilderness area, it's one experience. You can be in a more manufactured, altered environment. But there's still beauty both places, and there's still, there's not as much danger in the artificial.
Not as much danger.
You're not up against the elements in the same way. You're not up against things that sting you and are truly dangerous, the snakes and whatever.
Good, thank you, Carol. So she's comparing being in the Arctic, which is a wild, pristine place, and the Arboretum, which is more controlled, but they're both beautiful, and we can appreciate both. Yes?
I'm Catherine. As a couple of people here know, I worked for an Israeli company for over 10 years. And when I knew I was getting ready to retire, I brought my kids over for my last business trip. And we took a bus trip through the desert and along the Dead Sea. And my son said, "This is so incredibly beautiful, and yet there's all this war in Israel between the two main groups of people, but then others as well." And then he also asked, why is it called the Dead Sea? It has to do with the high amount of salt in the sea. But his comment about it's so beautiful and yet it's so sad that there's all this war here.
Yes. Thank you, Catherine.
As if nature had anything to do with it.
Yes, nature. The way you just said that, as if nature had anything to do with it. Like, nature is a living entity, and it's kind of sitting back, like, just watching all this. Maybe come back to that point. Thanks, Catherine. She talked about going to the Dead Sea area with her son, right?
And my daughter, yeah.
Yes.
The other one, and actually my husband and I experienced this with Dale and Carol a number of years ago, but we went to Mount Rushmore. And so we're in this gorgeous setting with these natural lakes and mountains, but then we go to Mount Rushmore, and I honestly didn't know quite how to feel about it, in part because I was with wise people who had lived there and experienced it before. But here's this beautiful mountain, and what an honor that they're honoring these people who have made these enormous contributions to our country, but at the same time they've carved up a mountain. And I sort of was wowed by both the importance of that monument and the destruction of that natural place.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for sharing that.
That's kind of a segue from, I'm Muriel. My husband and I had our second week of our honeymoon in Yosemite. First week, San Francisco, which had some pretty exciting visual things in terms of course, you know where San Francisco is. And it was just absolutely spectacular. And the reason I'm saying a segue from what Marcia says is that what has gone on since 1968 in terms of all the natural disasters, but also human, you know, I'm sure you could, but it was just the wide range, the meadows and the wonderful granite rocks, and it just was absolutely stunning. And just, we actually slept in kind of a log cabin type thing. So it's instead of the fancy hotel in San Francisco. And it was just mind-boggling. And then eventually ended up going to the redwoods, which is beyond belief.
Sir, thank you.
No, 7 weeks ago, my wife and I got to experience Machu Picchu and some of these other sites that were all built oriented with the summer equinox or the winter solstice, you know, or things like, you know, just that's so precise. And also these stones that supposedly, you know, 100-ton stones supposedly brought down from mountains 5 to 7 miles away, but to instruct that sexy woman too. But then also, we went to the Amazon where you see how really nature is, you know, I mean, it's really a life-changing experience, just the immersion in that with these little skiffs you go out and you hear and see, and they find out all the different life that's around you. That's very impressive.
No, I would say my most memorable experience in nature, I'm sorry I walked in late, was as a child. It was climbing trees, and then when the snow melted, we lived kind of out in the country, the snow would melt and there'd be water that would run through one of the metal pipes, whatever you call them. Culverts under the road and out the other side, and then I used to take like little pieces of wood and that and put it in there and watch it go down. So nature really started in childhood, my memories of nature, and it was literally out my back door, practically in my yard.
It sounds like a magical kind of time.
Yeah.
How many of you, yeah, okay, please, go ahead. Okay.
You were asking about how we feel, and I think it's more joyful to notice the beauty and the awesomeness, but I feel like I turn away from the ugly and the bad, because I don't want to take the time to feel bad. I don't want to feel mournful. So I
And by the bad, you mean like when a
sad.
lion takes down an animal?
Sad and, feeling sorry for the beings that are being destroyed.
Okay.
And I tend to avoid dealing with my emotions, my negative emotions about that, because it's hard to. There's so much to be sad about of what's happening in the destruction of our earth. And, I think it's important to take time to really acknowledge that things we're seeing really are sad, and to mourn that.
Thank you for sharing that. I imagine people resonate with that. Yes, ma'am.
So my name is Harriet. 2 years ago, I went on a gorilla trek in Western Africa to the Bwindi National Forest, and it's now a gorilla sanctuary, and it was a fascinating thing to do, and it was fascinating to watch the gorillas and have the guides explain to us the social stuff that was going on around them. And then we left and went to our very luxurious hotel, which is all safari hotels are amazing. And the village right there is where all the people that used to live in the forest now live. And so it was this amazing thing to see the gorillas and this incredible sadness to see how the poverty of the people who used to live in the Bwindi forest, who were made to leave by somebody so that could become a gorilla sanctuary and a tourist place. They now live in extreme poverty in the village. It was this imbalance was just phenomenal.
Thank you for sharing that. I can also identify with that because many years we would go to South Africa with students and we would do a safari. And when you see millions of people living in shacks around the major cities still, and then you see the safaris and how only those with the money can afford to do that, and then a lot of those people, most of them are driven off of those lands, right, and can't even now enjoy, right? And there's some analogy, I would say, to the United States, with Native American cultures who were driven from their lands. And fortunately, we have national parks that were formed, right? We have forest preserves, which are beautiful, but in a lot of cases, those indigenous peoples lost the ability to enjoy their own places, right? And it's something that we deal with in my class. One last question before I move on, but this is wonderful because I think it's really important that we kind of get in touch with who we are in relationship to nature. And those of you who have shared or those who haven't, do you feel that your experience of nature was spiritual? Spiritual? Oh yes, a lot. Everybody seems to be nodding. Why do you say that? Why yes?
Well, my two experiences are the Grand Canyon and then the Northern Lights. And there's I have no words to express it. I've been to the Grand Canyon twice, once in my, I think, 20s, and then with my daughter. And we both reacted the same way. We just went to the edge in the Grand Canyon and sat down and went. It was silent. And that was just walking in the park. It wasn't even exploring anything else. And it's just, how does this exist? This is just so magnificent. And if you've ever seen the Northern Lights, that was the same feeling. It was like, oh my God. It's just, yeah.
Wow, it's beyond.
It's just beyond the explanation.
Human construction, right? It's God, right? It's from God. Yeah. Other thoughts about why it's spiritual?
I remember as a very young child in a Sunday school class, the teacher asked, where do you see God? And I see God in the trees and the clouds. And he said, oh no. No.
I'm glad you brought this up.
And it's like, I was maybe, 5 years old. And of course I still remember it now. And it's like, how dare he?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. How many of us have heard maybe from our children, oh, I'm going to go worship God in nature today. I'm not going to go to church. Right? Right? And how often I think traditionally that's been kind of pushed aside like, no, you can't do that out there. You have to do it in the institutional places we've decided. And the older I get, the less I believe that. Of course, both are important, right? Yes. Any other comments about spiritual? Why your experience in nature you felt is spiritual?
I mean, for me, I several years ago was going through a rather jaded period of religion in general and not sure what I thought of God and everything, and it was nature that brought me back. It was seeing the first concept of God that I was able to accept and be comfortable with again was Mother Nature, and seeing that as God, and then kind of moving from there. So nature has always been the safe place in my life, and I realize some of that is because I've grown up in the Midwest where we don't have bears, we don't have poisonous snakes, and nature is safe around here. But for me, it's always been a safe, I can let my guard down kind of place. And that was where I was first able to come back to seeing God again.
There's ways in which nature embraces us, or thank you for sharing that. So in Genesis 1, we all know Genesis 1, right? God creates everything. And a couple things to say about that. In the history of Christian theology, we tended to see God as separate, a separate creator, and God is creating everything, but God is not those things. God is separate. Does this kind of ring a bell?
Yeah.
Right? But on the other hand, you can also read this text is that all these things are coming from God, whether from God's speech or God's breath. Okay? So there is a kind of a little bit of a divide theologically, like some like to see God as separate, and, you know, there's no way humans are like God, there's no way nature is divine. But then there's another way to read it, and that is that, yes, God is separate, but God is also in things, in creation, through it. As St. Francis kind of implied when he says, God, you are through the winds, you are through the earth, because you created it all. That's usually called panentheism. You ever heard that? Panentheism, which suggests God is both separate, but also in and through nature. And I think that is a good way to, not a bad word to use for most indigenous traditions. Not that, there is an old misunderstanding, say, for example, that Native Americans worship rocks or worship trees. That's not accurate.
Right.
As though pantheism says nature is God, right? If you see a tree, you're seeing God. That's pantheism. That everything is God. But that's not really an accurate term for indigenous cultures, I think, broadly. It may be a term that Western, kind of modern theologians have wanted to kind of say, well, that's not what we do. Kind of disparaging. But in any case, let's move along. I thank you for sharing. Most recent experience in nature. Oh, okay, this would be this morning, right? Yes, please.
Well, this morning, just walking to church and seeing the tulip, the daffodils. I mean, I've been seeing them, but I was seeing yesterday one on the 45-minute walk, and just, I live on Lake Street, so I had to turn and go down east to hear the birds, hearing the birds, but seeing all the, I mean, I get so excited to see the little buds coming on the trees, and of course now, you know, but I could go on and on about just how wondrous it is when spring.
Wondrous.
Spring is sprung.
Spring is sprung, I like wondrous. If we go back to our spiritual part, and we're thinking that, okay, God is behind all this, then that is a very tangible experience that you just had, that we can have, that God is, and I can't explain this is a mystery, right? Of how God has set everything in motion, and it continues, and it continues, and it reproduces itself. But there you have that moment of
It's just
God is giving us the gift, right? Through the plants. The plants are participating in...
Yeah, the little crocus things have been coming up for quite a while, all the blue,
Right.
I don't know what those little blue
Yeah.
flowers are, but it's good.
I have plants inside that are overwintering, right, in pots, and like, they are leaning to the window. And I know how scientists explain this. They say because the sun is there, their cells break down and they lean. Okay. But the spiritual explanation is that they are aware that the sun is getting stronger and they want to be in it, right? And they're moving that way. And so they're longing to get outside. They're just waiting to, like an animal, a dog. I actually think, you know, we can think of plants like our, you know, your pets. They want to go outside. They want to run around in the yard, right? Why not plants? Why not, right? They're all part of God's creatures. Sounds crazy, maybe. Other experiences, your recent experiences, we have time for a couple. Keep going here.
I had a similar emergence of spring experience a couple of weeks ago. I was dog sitting for a friend who lives up on the 19th floor here in Oak Park and looking down over Austin Gardens. And the first day I was there, it was all just, you know, the gray-brown of winter. And then we had rain overnight. And the next morning, looking at the field there in Austin Gardens, you couldn't see it when you were down on the ground. But from up high, you could just see this like tinge of that like bright spring green, and I was like, it's here. It was like the first sign of the green.
Nice. Kind of a God's eye point of view.
Right. Yeah.
I recently saw picture from outer space of New England during the fall season. I know probably many of you have been to New England in the fall.
Yes.
And literally from space, you can see the bright orange on the
The
earth.
reds and the yellows.
Yeah. A couple other, anything recent this morning, recent experiences in nature that were moving or something?
I was just going to mention seeing how many, just recently saw 3 or 4 pairs of robins. And they were like 2, and I was thinking like, there's one male, and I couldn't tell as much as like with cardinals, it's easy to see the colors as to which male and female, but just seeing all the robins, having to get their worms.
Yes, yes. Thank you. I want to share an experience I had, because one of my questions is, what has been an experience of danger, like some of you mentioned, when you're in the pristine natural wilderness, you're more exposed to animals and threats. So I want to tell you a quick little story, and this is where a story of my own experience where I thought I was in control of the situation, but I wasn't. This is at my little cabin in the mountains of North Carolina, okay? And I was doing a little work under my deck, and sorry, I won't go on too long here, but the posts that go down into the ground, they're like 8 or 10 feet off the ground, and I was supposed to put gravel in the post holes years ago. Well, I hadn't done it. So I had to go down there and dig out the dirt in the hole and then pour the gravel in. It was not an easy task, and it's on the side of a mountain, actually, right? So here I am doing this, and I'm digging in one of the post holes, and I happen to look over about 5 feet from me, and there were some swarming, looked to me like bees, right? And I'm like, okay, they're over there, but I'm over here. I'm not bothering them. I'm just going to finish digging out my post hole, and then I'm going to pour my gravel in, and I got to finish this job. It's been waiting for years, right? So I dig out there, and I'm pretty much done. But this one, what I thought was a bee, was kind of getting closer and closer to me. I'm like, okay, he's not happy that I'm vibrating the earth. And so I thought, okay, I'm almost done. So I do my last shovel, and just as I do my last shovel and I'm leaving, it stings me right in the neck. I'm like, okay, I get it. You didn't want me here. So I invaded their space, right? And I wasn't observant enough to realize that he had been circling me and trying to warn me for a while, but I was just intent on doing my thing. And so I got out of there and climbed up onto my level land, and I thought, okay, let me go put some ice on this, and I'll come back. Stupid me, right? Like, I got to finish this job. I got to get this gravel in this hole. Okay, and I still was thinking it was bees. Well, I went inside, and that thing started swelling up. I didn't have an allergic reaction, fortunately, but it was hurting really bad. I thought, well, maybe that wasn't a bee. Maybe it was more like a hornet or something, right? Well, I still went back out there thinking I was going to, well, as soon as I went out there, several of them were like, oh, she's back. And so I had actually covered myself thinking I'm protected now, and they were just like, I found out later that they emit some sort of pheromone, so they recognize you when you come back, because you smell like what they sprayed you with. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I'm leaving. So, okay, this is not the end of the story. So I had to give up, right? So I had to leave. I didn't have much time there. I came back here. A few weeks later, I go back. I'm like, okay, I got to finish this. No, I can't finish this job. I found out that it was a hornet's nest by talking to local people and everything. And I'm like, okay, I can't finish this. I'm going to have to hire somebody to come out here and get rid of this hornet's nest. So I spent hours probably trying to find a company to come do it, make the arrangements, okay, blah, 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 right? So I got this guy to come out when I could be there. He comes out with his truck, he gets his ladder out, he puts it down the side of the mountain, he climbs down there and he looks, he says, he picks up one little piece of the hornet's nest. He said, maybe this was it, but I really don't see the nest here. He said, I see that it looks like maybe something, scraped it away. He said it was either a bear or maybe a raccoon, because they like to eat the larvae, right? Well, this little guy had been in my yard a few times in that time frame. So I figured that and we've had multiple bears in that neighborhood last year at this time. not just this little one, right? But I figured, okay, nature took care of that for me. The bear went over there and just took care of it. It's like he was going through one day and decided to have a little meal, and that was it, right? So it was an interesting thing where nature has a certain balance to it, a certain rationality, but when we intrude ourselves sometimes and we're not watching, and when I should say we are not in balance, in tune in the way that would be helpful, more helpful. So anyway, that was my little story. But danger can be there. I'm going to move along. I already mentioned that the Bible can reflect an indigenous worldview in many ways. People live close to the land. Hunters and gatherers were in the ancient times, but then they were agriculturalists. Through most of the biblical period, people were agriculturalists, right? There were towns, right? Some were a little bit bigger cities, but mostly people lived close to the land. And as I've already mentioned, Genesis 1, the Bible starts off by suggesting that all of creation is from God. However, this is not something that is strange to us. In our modern lives, and in this culture, particularly in the United States, we tend to separate the sacred and the secular, right? We separate. Now, that doesn't mean we don't believe God can be involved in all things. We do believe that, right? But in our culture, in our society, we tend to live as though these are very separate things. And in a democracy, we separate church and state for good reasons, as I pointed out up there. It's complicated stuff, okay. But while ancient peoples could not have understood in their time the findings of modern science, they did understand the organic processes of nature. They understood how to live in balance with nature. They understood how to grow crops. They understood how animals operated. They understood the cosmos to some extent, right? But sometimes when we read the Bible, and we read maybe even Genesis 1, or we read Genesis 2 and 3, the Garden of Eden story, sometimes we look at that as kind of primitive or, ill-informed, lacking scientific knowledge. Of course, they didn't have science to explain how the universe was created, and we're still trying to figure that out. They told a story, they told an account in the best way that they understood. We understand that, right? But sometimes we throw out the baby with the bathwater, I think. We throw out the indigenous worldview of recognizing that nature and the created order is spiritual. And so a lot of times when we look at people who are writing about environmental concerns, the green movement, they look at the sciences. That's important. We need to understand what's going on. And people get involved in social action. Hey, we want to stop global warming. Young people today. But a lot of the time, what's left out is the spiritual. And I really feel like if we can bring the spiritual back into our discussion of the crisis of the earth, and ways in which we can, in some ways, return to some indigenous understandings of being in balance with the earth and living in harmony with it, that can really bolster our efforts, right? Here I share just one. There are more than 500 Native American tribal nations in this country that are recognized, more than 500. A lot of people might assume that most Native Americans died in the past and there are no more Native Americans left, but that's not true, of course. For those who still follow some traditional practices, in Lakota, for example, they have a belief in Wakantanka, or the Great Mystery, which in our parlance we might say is similar to God. Source of all things. This is from Luther Standing Bear's description. That Wakantanka, the Great Mystery, flows with a unifying force through all creatures and elements of nature, including the wind, waters, rocks, even humans. all things in nature are related and kindred. This is the tradition that a lot of times will say, will refer to all of our relations. Not only that, but that in a traditional way of living, where people could communicate with these entities. And that's another step here. Okay? And I want to get into that more. But they could be observant of one another. I think some of you mentioned observing when you're in nature, observing, appreciate and learn from one another, live in harmony, learn from one another. How many of you have heard of this book, Braiding Sweetgrass?
I just finished it.
Oh, okay. Okay. Braiding Sweetgrass. I recommend this to everybody, maybe even to read it during these 3 weeks. This is a #1 national bestseller. Written,
What's the first word?
braiding.
Braiding. B-R-A-I-D.
Braiding, let me go to a slide. There we go.
Oh, that helps.
By Robin Wall Kimmerer, okay? She is Potawatomi Indian. Okay, and if you're familiar with the history of this region, Potawatomi Indians lived in the area of Michigan, northern Indiana, and parts of Illinois. Even out in the suburbs, there are some villages that archaeologically been discovered, but that was kind of a temporary location for them because they were pushed into Kansas. Okay, but there are people who have Potawatomi background. This thing is making noise. There are people with Potawatomi background, of course, still living in our area, and she is Potawatomi, but she's also has a PhD and is trained in botany. And so this entire book are her reflections on her life, her personal stories, but what it has been like to try to integrate, first of all, deal with scientific denigration of her cultural understandings of nature. And then for her to affirm her scientific training and scientific knowledge, but also to try and integrate her own background of understanding of plants especially. Right? And a big thing that she talks about in this book is the teaching of plants. Teaching of plants. Now, one of the things that I'm hoping by the end of the 3 weeks is that we shift our kind of worldview, at least temporarily, to consider, and that's one of the ways. How do plants or animals or trees teach us? Has anybody ever had an experience in nature where you felt like you learned something from what you were watching?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, examples.
Yeah, well, my husband and I were in Florida, Everglades, and something made us look at this. To me, it was like I don't remember the name. A heron, of course, is huge, but but a bird that was this tall, but long legs, but
An egret.
and just what egret?
Maybe an egret.
Okay, so we spent it seemed like 5 minutes or more. I mean, it was like probably just maybe where Nancy's feet are from us. And just watching that bird, just watching and it wasn't, we were very still so it wouldn't be bothering the bird, but there's just something about the way that it deliberately walked and what it did. It's kind of like it was so informative, and it was teaching, I don't know, it was like teaching me, slow down, pay attention,
There we go.
be involved, but stop and look,
Okay.
and stop being so focused on what's storyline or what's in my head.
This is a great example, okay? This is exactly the kind of thing that I'm hoping, that people have experienced or might experience. This is very Native American, actually. The idea of an animal or something is in your path or crosses your path. And it's actually because of the whole intentionality of the universe, the creator, and how animals have consciousness. I can't explain it, but the synchronicity It's what you needed at that moment.
Yeah.
And that animal provided it. I've had this experience 4 or 5 times with different things. But it's only because at a certain point I opened myself up to that. After learning about some of these traditions, that we slow down and we observe, right? What does the ant have to teach us about working
ants,
together,
yeah.
for example? Or anybody else? I thought I saw a few of these.
I was gonna say, we lived in a place in New Hampshire at one point where in our backyard was a kingfisher, which is a kingfisher is a beautiful bird that eats fish, and it dives for fish. And the thing that just struck me when I watched it again and again is how could it dive in this 4 feet water and not kill itself? Because it would always swoop up and have its fish in its mouth. And the second thing is watching woodpeckers always just awesome. I mean, it's just I'm awestruck that I've had 2 major concussions, and why doesn't this woodpecker why isn't its brain just nature just gives so much awe.
Did you, seeing the woodpecker though, give you strength somehow to like survive your concussion? Or what did it?
Well, nature
It's like-
I can say I'm here because nature has inspired me in so many different ways. But it's more the adaptations of these species and how different. I just mentioned 2 birds. Now they're not related.
But different animals have different qualities.
Right.
That
Especially.
that as humans, it comes back to your point earlier. We sometimes give animals human qualities, but animals can highlight qualities that we would like to have. Right? And it's a very indigenous way of looking at things. I once had, I was going through some time, I don't remember what it was, I was trying to decide, should I speak up or should I intervene, should I hold back, whatever. And I happened to be in the mountains again, and this red fox crossed my path at dusk one night, right at the moment, right on the days when I was struggling with that. And the fox is kind of like, the good quality that I got from that was, you don't have to be seen to be effective. You can be behind the scenes. The fox isn't often seen, and so that was the quality of the fox that I gained. It's like, okay, I hear that, I'm going to do that. And it worked, right? And it was synchronicity, right?
I was shaking my head because I've been in the presence of a red fox in Idaho, but.
Yeah, and so in Native American traditions, they recognize that different animals have different strengths, qualities, and that beyond just the basic recognition, that individuals can have a relationship with a particular animal, whether it's through their whole life or at a certain time in their life when it crosses their path. And the belief is that this is a spiritual experience, that the spirit of the ancestors, or the spirits of the creator, the animal participating as a spiritual entity, all come together to support us, right? Yeah.
Doesn't that the author say that those are the gifts of that being? That the animals are giving us a gift and we should be grateful. And even plants have so much to give us.
Yes, yes. Any other examples here? Have you been taught by an experience you had in nature? From a plant, a tree? This idea of communicating.
Everything.
Sorry?
I said from all of them. I grew up on a farm.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, yes, I listen to the learn from the smaller one.
So everything is like kind of you're learning from.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's some miracle. Even at home now, I have a lot of plants because I nest them and I have a big garden in the summer. And I talk to the plants. And they go, why you plant that out movement?
Some people talk to their plants, right? And I do, right? I sing sometimes a morning song to my plants when the sun rises, right? But a lot of times we make that comment, oh, I talk to my plants, and people laugh, right? Oh, yeah, you talk to them. But It's a very indigenous way of being. And like someone just said, they grow better.
And I have indigenous blood too.
What's that?
I do have indigenous.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
From the Caribbean. And I never met the person, but there was my mom, dad, my mother. I
What was it called? Try to hear me.
Pardon me?
What was your background, your culture?
Caribbean.
Caribbean.
Indigenous
Yeah,
Caribbean.
yeah.
Caribbean.
My father, the first generation from Spain.
Oh, first generation from Spain?
Spain.
Spain.
So maybe as we go along, everybody try and be open to receiving from nature in a way maybe it might be a little bit different for you or new, or continue what you have been doing. I'll tell you a really funny story. Oh, well, do we have a little bit?
We haven't met yet.
Okay. You can get humorous lessons from nature. So one time I was preparing this lecture, I was supposed to give, it was a pretty big deal. It was like, okay, audience, big audience, and I had to get it just right. And so I spent weeks working on this thing, right? And I had it written out, I had plenty, but I just kept trying to make it better, kept adding, right? Well, I was walking down from where I live on the sidewalk, and there was a squirrel. Okay, that's another story. But there was a squirrel sitting up on the branch right above the sidewalk, and it had a big walnut or something in its mouth, and it was chattering nevertheless. I'm like, that is the strangest thing. Here's a squirrel, he's looking right at me, he's got this big nut in its mouth, and chattering. I can hear the chatter, but clearly the squirrel could have made noises more clearly without that walnut in its mouth. Do you see what I'm saying? What was the lesson? Stop putting too many words in your mouth. Stop trying to say too much. Because you just need to deliver, a message. Chill, right? So, I laughed. I realized at the moment that was a message. And it was humorous. And what does the squirrel know, right? Well, in the larger scheme of the cosmos, the synchronicity, for some reason, I got that message. So anyway, one thing I want to mention real quick is that this is the month of Earth. It's Earth Month, right? Mm-hmm. Earth Day is April 22nd. I don't know, they had an eco extravaganza yesterday at the library in Oak Park. I looked up Oak Park events, all right? And so today, there's something this afternoon from 2 to 4, an open house of people who are doing clean energy, and you can, you might have to sign up for it, yeah. But it's online. And then there's a community cleanup day, April 12th. These are all part of Earth Day, so if you're interested in becoming more involved or doing more things, a recycling event, April 19th. One Earth Film Festival. Apparently there's a really cool movie that's going to be shown as part of the film festival called Every Little Thing. And you can see
What's it called?
at the Village Hall. And this is about a lady who works with hummingbirds. Have you heard of this? And they get injured and she helps take care of them. And it's apparently very inspiring. And you get to see, more about hummingbirds that maybe you hadn't seen. But that's coming up. I think that's all I could find. Yeah. But, so just to highlight the fact that we are in Earth Month, as if we didn't need to be reminded every day, right? So, but I guess anybody else have comments?
So I'm just gonna say, if you guys have any more questions, let's do them one-on-one with Dr. Lee, because we wanna let everybody out to get upstairs for church. But let's say. Next Sunday, same time, same place, and then 2 weeks after that, so not Easter, but looking forward to the next portion of this.
Thank you. Next time we'll look at some more biblical texts and some more native traditions, and so that's what we'll do. I mentioned, a couple essays if people want to read up a little bit on.
Has anybody been seeing The Americas with Tom Hanks as narrator? They're talking about hummingbird.
Yeah, that's on
It's just
tonight.
amazing.
Thank you all for sharing so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Thank you.